Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be discussing another famous line of the London system in which blacks plays knight f6 instead of d4. Knight f6 is played by players who usually play the King's Indian defense against white. So they are expecting after d4, knight f6, they expect us to play c4, which is basically the Queen's Gambit. Sorry, the King's Indian, in which they play g6. White plays knight f3, d6, knight c3, bishop g7. They castle. Excuse me. They castle. Knight comes to d7. So this is basic theory. I'm not going to go into deep lines in this. This is what black usually plays against the Queen's Gambit. But in the London system, when they play this, we directly play bishop f4. Now bishop f4, most players as black are used to it now, but before bishop f4 was a confusing move for black, and many players as black would just play uh, d5 after this and go with the line in which e3, and they just have a fianchetto variation like this, and it's basically London system. Just the bishop is instead of d3 or d3 or e7, d6 or e7 is now on g7. The problem with this is it's kind of hitting a rock. So many players keep going with the normal structure of the King's Indian with d6, then e3, bishop g7, bishop d3. So advice I have to London players is to keep playing the structure. The London structure is solid against this line, and it always works. It's not a problem. And then you go c3, castles, knight d2. Here there are two moves which can possibly be played. The most famous one over here is probably, the most famous one here is probably e5 or c5. Some people also play rook e8. So a c5 I might discuss in another video because c5 goes into extremely deep theory and will take some time. And e5 is what I'm going to talk about now. Rook e8 is basically just a move where you play rook e8 first and then you play e5. It's not a big difference, so I'll keep going with e5. So the possible moves here is to go bishop g5, thinking you can pin this knight. But I would recommend, since you're playing the London and if you're starting out to play, keep your bishop on g3 because that's where you're used to it being and it's not a problem. So bishop g3, rook e8. Again, rook e8 can come before or after. Instead of bishop d3, there's one possibility, which is d takes pawn. I don't think this is a good move, d takes, because then pawn takes. And if you're thinking you could play bishop takes pawn, just winning a pawn for free, it doesn't work. So knight takes bishop, knight g4, attacking the knight over here. Then knight takes, when the knight is diverted, you just play queen takes d3. In this position, black is clearly better because of the space. You have lost your rock pawn, the pawn which is supposed to be the rock. Other thing is your knight here is kind of misplaced. I don't see a proper way that you can bring it back. Like a big threat is currently black playing h5 or f5. These both moves almost trap the knight. So you kind of have to find good places. So you might play a3, but then the knight takes some time and it's very misplaced. This is a line which I don't recommend. Second of all, this queen is very annoying. Stops you from castling kingside. Even if you try to exchange by playing knight to b3, you can play knight to f3 because if you play knight to f3, the problem is this knight has no good squares then. So then the queen just goes back to b5, or it could go to a3. I like b5 more. b5, now the queen again is targeting the f1 square. You can castle. So this is basically the idea why you should not take the pawn. It might look free, but in the end, it's just a trap for your pieces to just look extremely weak. So bishop g3, rook comes to e8. Again, I was talking about rook e8. It can be played before or after. Here, the move I recommend is queen c2. It's a nice, simple, easy move. There are some mistakes which you can make here, like e4. People are tempted by going for the main rule in the opening, which is occupying the center. This is not wrong. You have the center, but here I just feel like it doesn't work because your center is not well protected because After e takes, knight takes. You can play pawn takes, but now these pawns look like hanging pawns. I don't really like these two pawns here. Yes, they're center pawns, but it's where like you have black has easy targets, and this bishop can be opened up pretty quickly. So I really don't like this. So if knight takes, after knight takes, you have this rook, which is extremely annoying. It's against your king, and they can also be knight takes pawn. And then there's if you play bishop takes, they're extremely annoying moves like f4. And now suddenly your king is overexposed in the center, since your solid pawn structure of e6 d4 is broken. And after this is broken, black has basically just said, even though this bishop is not active right now, this bishop has extremely gained some power after a rock has been moved, and this rook is just extremely active right now, and you are going to lose your bishop. There's no way of defending that. You can win a pawn in this variation, but I feel it's very risky. You can play this in a blitz game if you want, if you think your opponent cannot play well enough to convert this advantage. But I would definitely not recommend this in a standard game, because your opponent, if they take some time, while black should be able to push easily. Not easily, but black should be able to push for a win. And one other move, which is people feel like is a good move because you want to keep the structure over here solid intact. So you play knight to e4. Knight to e4 is a bad move because knight takes, bishop takes, pawn takes. Now you just see this rook again activates pretty quickly. So many players as black. This is the second most common variation against London, and players who play this are extremely threats because this position makes white very uncomfortable. And if you don't play precisely and you don't follow the simple opening rules, you can get into some tricky positions. So for the next video, I'm going to be analyzing a game in this variation. I think I'll try to find a game which I've played, because I've seen this position occur, you could say, around 150 times, because this is the second most common line as black. So I'm gonna probably find a game which I have played, and or else I'll find a GM game. But the thing is, many GMs don't play this, because if you go to the opening when d4, knight f6, knight f3 is played, you'll see many players as black just directly play d4. d4 again you get the same London structure, but these are only players as black who are not comfortable with playing the structure with g3, bishop g7, knight bd2 over here, and play d5 immediately. Just saying that, okay, you want to play the London, I will play common moves. But many players, if you're a d4 player, if you're a player who likes to play d4 and you have some experience in Queen's Gambit, I could say one trick here is after they play d4, you could also play your Queen's Gambit variation immediately, just because your opponent has prepared knight f6, just because he or she knows the king's Indian. With c4, you could surprise them that I'm now playing the Queen's Gambit, and now I want you to find a way to control this. But I only recommend playing this if you have experience playing the Queen's Gambit. Don't try this out if you have never played the Queen's Gambit or know very little theory. This can be tricky, and if your luck's in your favor and you have the experience, black could just fall for it, because black's setup is now destroyed. The d6 pawn is now moved, so you can't play e5 and c5 ideas. They're extremely weak now. And this bishop g2 plan doesn't just look right anymore. So thank you for watching, and I will try to post new videos every day, and the next one will be a game analysis. And please subscribe and like if you enjoyed it. Thank you.